Hey everybody, I'm Dr. Keith Ruiter, educator, researcher, and avid gamer. Welcome to History Check, where we dive deep into practical tips for infusing real-world historical authenticity into your tabletop role-playing games. Now today we're kicking off a new series that taps into Viking Age history in order to supercharge your D&D characters. We'll add a dash of historical flavor, deepen your storytelling possibilities, and most importantly, amp up the fun. Most of the tips and suggestions that I'm going to offer here can be directly useful for other TTRPGs, but we're using D&D as a jumping off point. And we're going to start with the Barbarian class. It's not just first alphabetically, but it's also the quintessential choice for a Viking-inspired character. The class as we know it today draws heavily from popular perceptions of Vikings, especially Berserkers, or Berserks as they're probably more accurately called. But here's the twist. Those perceptions are a bit outdated. Like stuck in the early 20th century, sort of outdated. Our understandings of Viking Age peoples, including Berserks, has evolved significantly since then. So our goal today is to really just bring you up to speed with some of the latest knowledge, give you some more options to shape your barbarian characters. I'm going to provide tips for conceptualizing and creating 3 distinct character types. One which is rooted more in historical accuracy, another which blends history and fantasy a little bit, and a third which leans very heavily into the fantastical. My goal here is not to walk you through strategies on how to make your characters as S-tier as possible. Instead, it's really all about how we can add more flavor and fun to the characters that we play. And if you find this video helpful, please take a minute to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell, because your support really fuels the growth of this channel, and we're just immensely grateful for it. But I think we can go further in making a more history-inspired barb. And to do so, I want to introduce you to Egill Skallagrímsson, or Egill, the son of Skallagrim. Now, if you caught our Viking Age masterclass on giving your characters Viking-inspired names, note that there's no badass nickname for Egill here. Not everyone gets a nickname. But his dad's name is literally Skallagrim, and that's a joke about his early balding. So that gives you an idea about how nicknames work here. Now, Egill isn't a berserker himself, but he's a great source of inspiration for anyone who may want to find more interesting ways to play a barbarian in D&D. Born in the 10th century, Egill is known for his fierce temper and immense strength. Sound familiar? But here's the twist. He's also known for his poetic and legal prowess, and his fierce loyalty and close working relationships with a small group of friends, patrons, and family members. Egill's saga recounts his exploits as a Viking raider, a warrior, and a poet. He participates in courtly intrigue and battles throughout Scandinavia and beyond, and he earns this fearsome reputation for his ferocity in combat, and even serves in the retinue of the King of England. His prowess as a poet is equally legendary, composing verses of both praise and vitriol that are regularly heralded as some of the most beautiful and complex in the Old Norse language. We teach them all the time. He also has a deep knowledge of runes, purportedly maintains a close personal relationship with the god Odin, projectile vomits at feasts in order to dishonor his enemies, and saves sick children. This is no stock NPC. This is a complicated and detailed PC that we can take some notes from. So for starters, Egill is a character of rich emotional sensitivity, complexity, and depth. Is he angry a lot? You bet. But he also has a keen sense of justice. He loves harder than he hates, and everything from poetry to feasting is a weapon in his arsenal as he navigates a life of fame, fortune, loss, family complexity, and intrigue. And against all odds, and in spite of his aggressive nature, he finds a way to hang up his adventuring hat and retire in his old age, integrating back into rural agrarian Icelandic community life. He's an interesting reminder that barbarians, and especially barbarians taking the path of the Berserk, don't have to particularly like the path they walk. Egill's emotions get him in a lot of trouble, and he's acutely aware of it. Remember that personal internal conflict can be a great way for making a more three-dimensional character, and barbarians can be at their most intriguing when they struggle to contain their emotional outbursts. It's also totally okay to play a barbarian with a half-decent intelligence or charisma score who has interests beyond hitting things. Egill is a virtuoso with poetry. He has interests in law, he appears to speak at least one language beyond Old Norse, and has knowledge of runes and medicine. Your barbarian characters will be a lot deeper and more complex, and outside of combat will be a lot more fun for you and everyone else at the table if you play less of a stock character. Furthermore, the path of the Berserker doesn't have to be one that's entirely defined by rage in the traditional sense. Instead, it might be a lot more interesting, real, and enriching to play your Barbarian as highly emotional, where a diversity of human emotions can be used to sharpen the connection between your body and your mind, allowing you to enter this battle frenzy. For a more realistic Viking-inspired Barbarian build, I would recommend really looking at Egill closely to see the way that he weaves like an impish humor into some of his actions, how love or a sense of justice drives some of his violent undertakings, and how the most meaningful moments of rage in the saga actually correlate to the profound sadness he experiences at the loss of his family members and his friends. Frenzy doesn't always have to be the result of anger, and this more realistic build has tons of opportunity for building a rich character with meaningful relationships. And don't forget, if you're looking to get pretty close to real-world history here, your Viking-inspired barbarians should not be wielding hammers or two-handed swords. These really weren't much of a thing in the Viking Age. Even swords should be limited for low-level characters unless they are the beneficiaries of some sort of noble patronage. Swords are expensive. Big axes, pole arms, axe shield, spear shield, and in rare cases, sword and shield combos are definitely the way to go. And for flavor and nods to history, I would recommend leaning into the Barbarian's unarmored defense. But what about more fantastical Barbarian builds? For something that's a mix of Viking Age realism and fantasy, I'd recommend the Path of Ancestral Guardians. There's a really cool and growing body of evidence for Viking Age ancestor worship. This includes a variety of archaeological and textual evidence which suggests that the living carried on deep, complex relationships with the dead, including regularly visiting the grave sites of relatives, sometimes entering grave mounds to retrieve items or interact with the dead in some way, and even some examples of bones being incorporated into the fabric of houses. There's also some suggestion that certain feasts were intended to honor the ancestors of the community in some way. Now, interestingly, some of the best known examples from the sagas suggest that the spirits of female ancestors were the ones who were thought to be especially likely to continue to interact with the living. So for a slightly more fantastical Viking-inspired barbarian build, I would recommend that your character has a close affinity to their ancestor spirits, maybe spending so much time visiting graves that they have kind of withdrawn from wider society themselves, rather than being ostracized for a more traditional barbarian tendency of hitting things too hard too often. I'd also suggest tweaking the flavor elements of the Path of Ancestral Guardians to better reflect the feminine nature of these ancestor spirits. And I'll be honest, a frenzied barbarian flanked by a host of spectral, disapproving aunties is going to be a lot more unnerving than the spectral warriors described in the stock description. For this build, you might want to think more about how your character began to take an interest in these ancestral spirits in the first place. Was this the result of careful study and experimentation? Or did something tragic happen, leading the spirits to reveal themselves to you? Are the spirits a sense of comfort to you? Or are they unnerving, spiteful, or even horrifying? What drives them to continue to seek out the spirits? Are you a ritual specialist in your community, serving as a bridge between the living and the dead? What responsibilities or challenges does that come with? Similar again to the more realistic build we already discussed, I don't think this barbarian's rage should be anger-fueled either. In this case, perhaps, something more along the lines of an ecstatic trance, which allows for more natural communication with these spirits, would be more fitting. Now, these light touches can really add some depth to how you play your barbarian character and incorporate a good number of opportunities for fantastical storytelling too, while keeping things very Viking flavored. Now, what if you want to really lean into the fantasy elements? I think the Path of the Totem Warrior works well here with some specific tweaks. First, totems or dodems are a pretty sacred part of certain indigenous cultures. So instead of unceremoniously playing with something sacred, I'm going to call this the Path of the Fylgja. This works on a few levels, so let's unpack them. First, what is a Fylgja? A Fylgja appears to be a spirit or a supernatural being, usually in the form of an animal, that accompanies a person throughout their life and is associated in some way with their fate. Now, there doesn't have to be some sort of direct connection between the person and the animal that is the form of their Fylgja, and some Fylgja are actually not animals at all, but we're going for fantastical here, so let's lean in. On the other hand, berserks in general are also sometimes associated with shape changing into certain animals, especially wolves, dogs, and bears. And there's some interesting archaeological evidence that suggests that the literary idea of a berserk may have come from animal-inspired elite warrior groups from the late Iron Age, an earlier period, who appear to have dressed in animal skins in specific contexts. If we combine some of these elements together and let our imaginations run wild a bit, pun intended, the path of the Fylgja can work great for some more speculative or fantastical barbarian builds, with some extra Viking flavor. I don't think there's much need to tweak the mechanics of this primal path, but reshaping the storytelling behind it opens some great opportunities for you to elevate your gaming experience. For example, if Fylgja are associated with fate and can follow someone through their whole lives, when did your character first notice their Fylgja? Have they always been there, or is it something new? Fylgja are often associated with dreams and nightmares. Do these affect your character? And are there repercussions to them? Does your Fylgja seem tied to a lucky or an unlucky fate? Given this fatalistic association, choosing to take a bear trait at 3rd level, for example, should imply that you intend to take bear traits at level 6 and 14 too. But if you decide not to, are there consequences? Does choosing the trait of another animal in later levels affect your fate or upset your Fylgja? These can be really interesting opportunities for richer storytelling, and especially when working in dialogue with your GM, can add some great flavor and side quest potential for your gaming experiences. So there you have it. 3 different builds, giving you a whole host of ideas for how to play and build deeper, more developed Viking-inspired barbarians. If you have further ideas, or you want to tell us about your barbs, let us know in the comments below. We've got links in the description below, not just our Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links if you're feeling generous, but also a link to a whole doctoral dissertation on berserks, available for free through the University of Nottingham. Thanks for watching, liking our videos, and sharing them with your friends. It's a huge help and will ensure that we get more free, high-quality historical information to a wider audience. Thanks again. See you soon.